You see, now that's how you play against the Sharks. You can make a couple mistakes here and there, just don't make more than they do. If only the Kraken had played like that, the last two times these teams had met, they'd be at NHL 500. What's cracking, everybody, and welcome back to Kraken R&R, where the Seattle Kraken take care of business and beat the San Jose Sharks 6-2, making up at least a little bit for some of the mistakes of the past, including a couple nights ago against the Ducks, and get back within 4 games now of NHL 500, still needing a long run and stretch of wins in a row in order to get anywhere near the conversation for getting back in the hunt. But before we get to the game, there's one other piece of big news to get to first, and that was the news from Wednesday between the two games. The day I put out the video with the question in the title, is it time to move on from Philip Grubauer? And the Kraken seemed to have answered it by waiving him and sending him to the AHL. He did clear waivers, so he'll play with the Firebirds. Now, the best case scenario here, certainly for Grubauer anyway, but I think maybe even for the Kraken, as difficult as it might be to stomach for a lot of fans, is that he goes down to the AHL, has a complete resurgence, gets his confidence all the way back, does a 180, and is able to eventually come back to the team maybe late this season, but more likely next season, looking like the goaltender that we've seen for stretches throughout the time that he's been here. Not nearly enough stretches, but the playoffs, the one time the Kraken made it there, and certainly at least the goaltender that he was expected to be when he came here off that Vezina nomination. Now, obviously, even if that did happen, he would still come back up to the Kraken as the backup. Daccord has full out earned the starter spot, and nothing's going to change that anytime soon. And it's certainly not ideal to be paying a backup just under $6 million per year over the next 2 years like they would be doing with Grubauer. But if he can be that solid backup that's playing at least close to the level of Daccord in the spot starts that he gets, then it's probably still better to eat those last 2 years and then go find a backup. Or, I mean, if he really shined as the backup, you can just bring him back for a significant discount from what he's getting right now. Either way, it does help the Kraken a little bit then not have to deal with the buyout cost, which is the much more likely scenario here, that the Kraken do end up buying out the rest of Grubauer's contract over the course of the summer, and that we have seen the last of Grubauer in Seattle. Now, if they do that, they get about $4 million worth of savings on the cap this coming season, then down to about $3 million the year after that, and then they'll eat $1.7 million in cap hit the 2 years following after Grubauer's contract would have expired. So considering they'd have to pay a decent chunk of that savings over the next couple of years to get a new goaltender in Grubauer's spot anyway, if you can be confident that he can come back and give you at least NHL 500 goaltending to maybe slightly better than that in the 25 or so starts that he'd get as the backup to Daccord, then maybe it's worth it to just pay your backup just under $6 million for the next couple of years and not have to have that cap hit of $1.7 million of dead cap in the 2 years that follow, where at that point you're certainly hoping that you have a team that can get you at least 1 to 2 rounds into a playoff. And that $1.7 million could end up making a decent difference in free agency or at a trade deadline, for example. With that having been said, though, I just don't really see that happening. I think it is much more likely, if not nearly certain, that the Kraken will buy out Grubauer this offseason and then find some new backup. I just don't think he's really going to get enough opportunity at the AHL level to do enough to prove that he can come up and be that backup next season, especially given that it just hasn't really worked here over the last year and a half since Daccord has earned that starter spot. Plus, at the AHL level, you've got Coco, who you really do want to get the majority of the starts to continue his development there. And yeah, you still don't want to be overplaying him even at the AHL level, so Grubauer will get a fair number of starts, but he's not necessarily going to be the starter. At best, it'll be a tandem there in Coachella Valley, which, given the amount of season that's left, I don't know that that's really going to be enough for Grubauer to prove what he would need to earn that backup spot next season. Even with the Firebirds likely headed to the playoffs, where there'll be more games than he maybe would have at the NHL level to prove what he would need to. And even beside that, with a new backup likely costing you somewhere in the ballpark of $1 to $2 million per year, that does give you a decent chunk of savings on the cap for the next 2 seasons, where it's pretty clear that there's some pressure to make this team competitive and get into the playoffs immediately, and that could make a difference in these next 2 years. Plus, once we're getting 3-4 years down the road, that $1.7 million is going to get closer and closer to 1% of the salary cap. So it's really not that big of a hit to take to make your team better in the immediate future. And really then, to me, the only way that we see Grubauer back in Seattle is if a disaster happens, which would basically be a Decord injury. I suppose maybe if Stetska got injured. There's no way that Coco comes up to the NHL level. They definitely want him to continue to develop at the AHL level before trying to accelerate that process and hurt his confidence in any way. It's just not something I think they're interested in doing. So the only way really that Grubauer comes back is if there's an injury at the NHL level and they decide that they just rather bring him up than try to find some random free agent out there to bring in to fill that spot. Which, as I said in the previous R&R, I hate that this is what it's come to. I think this was the right decision for the Kraken to make, and I do think that it's probably the right decision going forward to buy him out and that we have seen the last of him, which sucks because he's, for one, a great guy to have around the team. I mean, you could tell that a lot of the guys, in spite of probably seeing the writing on the wall and knowing that this was coming, that it still hurt to lose a friend in the locker room and a guy that just a lot of them had been around now for 2.5 to 3.5 years. That was also a part of a lot of those early memories. Certainly the playoff run, even as fans, a lot of good memories with Grubauer and net with the Kraken. And it also sucks that we now lose what to me is one of the all-time great masks that he currently had. I mean, I absolutely love that goalie mask, but it's part of pro sports. Eventually, it's time for players to move on, whether that's the way that you'd like to see it happen or not. And in this case, it certainly was time, maybe even a little bit past time. With all that said, we still have a game to get to where the Kraken finally took care of business against the San Jose Sharks after losing to them in back-to-back games earlier this season. It wasn't a perfect game from the Kraken. They still had their blunders here and there, one especially at the end of the first period that cost them a goal, but they were few enough and far enough between that they were able to do what they needed against a pretty bad Sharks team. I mean, it was already a bad Sharks team coming into the season, but they had a significant number of injuries, including ex-Kraken Alex Wemberg, who has a minor injury that kept him out of this one. But coming into the game, the Sharks had 7 guys on their injured list, and they lost one midway through this one. So it was definitely a game that you couldn't afford to lose, not because of it hurting your playoff chances, which are already extremely bleak, but just for the general pride and general confidence going forward. I mean, everybody in that locker room knows that this is a much better team than the one that they're up against, and you just have to find a way to win this game, even if it doesn't necessarily help the team in any way in the future. And in that vein, they get off to a pretty good start early on in the first period with basically the same lineup out on the ice, except for obviously Decord in net, Stetska as the backup, and the one other change being that Cale Fleury also came up from the AHL level to take the spot of Riker Evans, who was out with an injury. Not directly the spot. Alexiak jumps up to play with Montour, where Evans had been for the last little bit, and Fleury steps in then with Mahura on the third pair, who honestly I think played a pretty decent game. He didn't get a ton of time on ice, though he did get a little bit of time as the kind of third option of a power play quarterback when Dunn ends up in a box during a Kraken power play, so Montour obviously then the first, and they put Cale Fleury out there as the second power play quarterback. Either way, decent game from him, doesn't get on the score sheet. But the Kraken off to a good start as it's the Chandler Stevenson line once again making some things happen offensively. On a rush, they are able to get the puck out of the offensive end, and then Bjorkstrand from one corner of the neutral zone out to the other catches Stevenson in stride. Some poor back checking and just not covering the play very well from the San Jose defense allows Stevenson to skate in and get a pretty open shot off from the inside of the faceoff circle. And since for whatever reason Stevenson on these rush chances seems to always be able to find the back of the net, unlike basically every other player on the team, regardless of how easy of a save it is to make, he finds it, and he does again here, past the blocker and into the far side of the net to give the Kraken the early 1-0 lead. And from there, the Kraken promptly collapse over the course of the rest of the first period, giving up certainly the majority of the good chances on their net, which Decord is able to answer almost every one of. I mean, I think by the end of the period, the shots on goal total was pretty close to even between the two teams, but the quality of shots was definitely leaning in the Sharks' favor. And eventually, at the end of the period, it's just one good chance too many for Decord, and even at that, it takes a weird bounce off of Shane Wright to get past him, as well as to start the play, Alexiak and Montour running into each other, which turns over the puck. Then it's a 2-on-1 going up to the net. Back and forth the two Sharks players go, before eventually one of those passes, which, if it had gotten through, it's a wide open player on the back door, would have left Decord basically a highlight reel save of the year type save to make to keep it out, but it doesn't even get there. It goes off the skate of right into the top corner past Accord to tie things up as we go into the first intermission. So once again, definitely not the first period you're looking for from the Kraken, even after the good start. They play an overall first period that kind of makes you wonder if a third complete collapse against the Sharks is about to happen. Fortunately though, as we get into the second period, unlike the typical second period for this year's Kraken, it's a pretty good one, and it gets off to a pretty good start pretty early on as the Kraken take back the lead. This time it's Oliver Bjorkstrand doing it himself, or at least finishing it himself anyway, as it's another passing play on a rush chance for the Kraken. This time all of it happens in the offensive end as Vince Dunn throws a puck that I think he's trying to bank off the end boards to get out to the far side. Either way, it ends up going off the back of the leg of Stevenson, kind of along the goal line and bouncing out in front of the net, where Bjorkstrand's able to get his stick on it first, whacking the bouncing puck out of midair and into the back of the net past Askarov, who really didn't have much of a chance as long as Bjorkstrand got to it first. And that gives the Kraken the 2-1 lead off of a pretty fortunate bounce, which kind of helps make up for the unfortunate bounce that tied things for the Sharks at the end of the first. And then less than a minute later, the Kraken back in the offensive end. The next shot on goal is going to find the back of the net as well, but it starts with a nice play from Shane Wright along the boards to intercept a pass, a ill-advised pass, a bad turnover in their own end of the ice from the Sharks. But Wright gets that puck and passes it right up to the middle of the blue line, where coming in on a change is Brandon Montour. He skates down to the high slot, fires off the bullet of a shot into the top corner to give the Kraken the 3-1 lead. And things are starting to finally go the way that you'd like to see them go against a team like the Sharks. And I say starting to, I mean starting to go the way you'd like them after what is now into the 8th period against this team this season. Of course, though, ever the team that likes to try to keep things interesting, the Kraken give the Sharks a chance to get back into the game with an almost immediate power play, which they do get a number of pretty good chances on. Fortunately, Decord is up to the challenge, stopping every single one of them, and then right as the power play ends, Schwartz out of the box gets across the blue line and then quickly turns around to do a 180 back the other way as a turnover happens on a flubbed shot for the last possible chance for the Sharks. And I think it's Alexiak that gets to it. Yep, just had to look it up real quick to confirm, but it is Alexiak who gets the loose puck first after that flub shot, throws it up along the boards to Schwartz, who's turned around 180 and gotten down the ice. It is kind of a bit of a one-on-one. There's a Sharks player right in stride with him, but not for very long. Schwartz is pretty fresh after sitting in the box for the 2 minutes, while the Sharks player with him has been on the power play for 2 minutes, as they spent pretty much the entire time in the Kraken end of the ice. So Schwartz is able to beat him down for what turns into basically a breakaway, and he puts it right through the 5-hole and into the net to give the Kraken the 4-1 lead, at which point, with this now being 3 goals on 4 shots in the start here of the second period for the Kraken, that'll do it for Askarov. He comes out, Georgiev goes in, and that really wouldn't solve many of the Sharks' problems, especially because they send the Kraken to a power play not long after the Kraken take this 4-1 lead, and then not very long into that power play, they give the Kraken a 2-man advantage. All of a sudden, these are common for the Kraken, the 3rd game in a row with a 2-man advantage opportunity, and this one even comes in the middle of the period where the Kraken don't have an intermission that interrupts it midway through. And with that being the case, about midway through, or actually not even quite, about 30 seconds into this 5-on-3, it's Montour again who finds the back of the net off a nice little passing play, which is a lot easier to do with a 2-man advantage. It's McCann up at the point, down to Stevenson on the far side, across the seam to Montour for that one-time shot. As long as he places it well, it's in the back of the net. Sure enough, he does. And the Kraken, with the power play goal, have the 5-1 lead, as well as now a decent chance to extend it with still a minute and a half left of power play. They aren't really able to make much of that minute and a half of power play, so we get into the rest of the second with the Kraken still holding what is now a pretty healthy lead that it would take a complete disaster, especially with Decord in net, to cough that up. But thankfully for certainly all of our sanity, they don't even think about allowing the Sharks back into this game, certainly not during the rest of the second period, where they really do control the pace of play throughout the rest of the second and have a pretty good press over the last kind of 6-7 minutes of the period to try to extend the lead with a number of shots on net, a lot of offensive zone time, but just aren't able to get another one past Georgiev at 5-on-5. So we head to the third with the Kraken still maintaining a 4-goal lead. And a few minutes into the third, after a couple good chances again by the Kraken, a couple saves from Georgiev, the Sharks would pull back to within 3. Now this time there's no weird bounce off a Kraken player that ends up in the net, or a couple defensemen running into each other that turns the puck over in the first place. It's just a nice pass from Celebrini across the slot to a player on the far side, to Foley, who then finds a screen real quick and fires off a shot that beats Decord. Now, that being said, it still was not played particularly well defensively by the Kraken, who just completely leave the middle of the offensive end wide open for Toffoli to do whatever he wants in once he gets that pass. And it's because of that he's quickly able to find his spot with that screen, take the shot, and get the Sharks at least their second goal of the game. Midway through the third period, though, it's still unlikely to really make much of a difference, and it's a whole lot less likely to make any kind of difference when a few minutes later, a nice little hustle play from Uhura, getting up into the neutral zone, slams a puck against the boards to get it past a Sharks player, and up to Eeli Tolvanen, who's got some space to skate into the offensive end. Kind of along the boards, though. He's not going to be able to cut towards the middle and turn this into a free breakaway or anything like that with at least one Sharks player back. So with a shot that would have to come from the outside, and Georgiev has at least looked pretty good in net since he came into it for the Sharks, Tolvanen instead decides to cut towards the middle of the ice right into the high slot, and then that's when you realize that that's not actually Tolvanen out there. It's instead his twin brother, who we've been seeing a lot of over these last few games. It's Eeli Tolvanen who fires off the shot and buries it into the far side top corner, putting it back the way he came. A perfectly placed shot to give the Kraken back the 4-goal lead. It's 6-2 for Tolvanen, or Golvanen, his fourth in the last 4 games, a 4-game goal streak for him now. Now from there, over the last 6 or so minutes of the game, the Kraken do kind of let the Sharks get the rest of the offensive opportunities, but none of them are particularly dangerous, even on one last Sharks power play, so the Kraken do finish this one out with the 6-2 win. Again, I think a much needed win, although it doesn't really help the Kraken much in the future. I suppose it makes it a little bit more likely that they get to the playoffs, but not in any significant way, really, and it does slightly hurt their potential of getting a better draft selection spot, but I think it was an important one for just the general morale of the team and confidence of the team that they can actually take care of business when they need to. Still, with a lot of work to do on the consistency of taking care of business, but it helps make up for a very disappointing second home loss to the Ducks the game before by preventing a second home loss to the Sharks. And with that, I think we're just going to jump right into the Kraken 3 stars here, since we already spent all that time at the beginning on the Grubauer situation, and to be honest, I don't really think there's that much more to be gleaned from a game against a bad Sharks team that was very injured, other than the Kraken taking care of business and at least not embarrassing themselves another time on home ice. With the 3 stars on this one, I am going to go with Chandler Stevenson for the first star. He had a fantastic game, gets the goal and at least 1 assist, maybe 2. Fantastic game for Chandler Stevenson. Really, it seems like he's turned a 180 over this last little stretch. The defensive end, maybe still kind of a 90-degree turn. There's still some issues in the defensive end for Stevenson, but it's nowhere near as bad as it had been over the first half of the season, and offensively he continues to produce. So while I'm still pretty confident the Kraken aren't going to get anywhere near the value of what they were paying him this season out of him, at least this could be the start of something in him actually being a little bit closer to worth that value if he can keep this going through the rest of this season and into next year. At the very least, it's no longer aggravating to watch him play. And yes, just to confirm, it was a goal and 2 assists for Stevenson. I almost forgot about the one that went off the back of his leg to give Bjorkstrand that game. Well, I guess it wasn't the game winner at the end. It was just the one that gave them the lead there early on in the second. But he had the one more traditional assist on the power play, and then that one at the start of the second. Either way, another good game for Stevenson. For the second star, got to go with Montour. 2 goals, and if there's only one bummer about the Kraken not allowing the Sharks to get back into the game, it's that they had enough of a lead where the Sharks didn't bother going with the empty net, so that Montour didn't have a chance. I mean, he had a couple more shots, but didn't have an empty net chance to finish off the hat trick, which would have been his second of the season. So yeah, another good game from Montour as he continues to find the back of the net. And then for the third star, I'm going to go with Eeli Tolvanen. He's now 4 straight games with the goal and continues to keep producing for the Kraken. That line, it's finding its way. It has its moments throughout the game. I don't know if it necessarily seems like they're clicking as a line, but at least they're all finding individual ways to contribute. Obviously, Golvanen with his 4th in 4 games, and then right earlier on had that nice breakup of a pass interception and then got it to Montour coming in as he skated in and got the goal for the Kraken there. So yeah, they don't necessarily very often seem like a cohesive unit, but individually they're all playing decently well. So hopefully once that starts clicking, once McCann can start finding the back of the net, which midway through the first period, the Kraken had a chance to go up 2-0. McCann with an empty net to shoot at and just put it through the blue and out behind the goaltender. So I'm sure he'll be thinking about that one, especially considering how the goal scoring has been going for him lately it was off a tight angle, so it's not like he was staring an empty net in the face from the middle of the slot or anything like that, but it's certainly a shot that most NHL players are going to put in the net 95, 97% of the time, and for a goal scorer like McCann, probably more like 99. This is the one of 100 that he probably misses from there. But of course, that's just how things have been going for him lately. Eventually, it'll start to come for him, just maybe not in time for him to have quite the goal-scoring season that we've seen over the first few years of him with the Kraken. Other than that, though, let me know what you think down in the comment section below about the whole Grubauer situation or this game. Whatever you feel like putting in the comments, I'd love to hear it. And until next time, stay safe out there, be good to each other. God bless, and go Kraken.